Hello and welcome to another edition of the Low Code Campfire. This is episode number 76 for December 2, 2022. And the arbitrary topic I've picked out for today is to talk about internal documentation, but of course, we can talk about anything you want to, and that's the way this meeting rolls. This is an event we do every week or most Fridays at this hour, and it's a community gathering. We talk about what we've got going on, our challenges, our experiences, and we encourage you bring something to show and be ready to help with ideas and suggestions because there's somebody else that might need a hand. These episodes are all recorded on our YouTube channel, and so you can go to youtube.com/plantanap and sign up for them. That link should have been in the email that you received today as well. We run a pretty straightforward agenda. We're really informal. We say hello, and then there'll be an opportunity to do first call. This is any important burning problems that you want to talk about or questions that you have. And then we often look at contributions to the Campfire website, our shared resource, the feature requests, anything that was submitted in advance. And sometimes we talk about ghost stories and dark corners, areas where you had trouble and searched after a ghost for a while. And dark corners, there's so much to the product, so we get off into places that we haven't been before. After an hour or so, we'll turn off the recording and go to our Afterglow segment, and that's a spot where we can hang out for a minute and have a virtual beer together. Lots of ways to engage, but the main is to jump in, talk to us. You can show and tell. You can type in the chat window. In the main guidelines that we have are, though, that be nice to each other, and then if you have some noise going on behind you, please remember to mute. You can submit questions or topics in advance, and I'll put them on the agenda as a submitted topic. You can do that here, and again, this link is in your in the emails that we send to you as well. So with that, good morning, hello. Looks like a very typical crowd.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Dale and everybody.
Good morning, all.
Ben's here. Patrick, is that you there? You're showing up. Yeah, there you are. Planting.
I was typing just as you were asking me.
He was incognito.
Oh, and we have a special guest star lurking in the background. Good morning, Bogdan.
Good morning. I'm a guest now, huh?
Well, it's been a meeting or two. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you out.
Hello, everyone.
But I did say star. Those listening later, I think everybody on the call knows, but Bogdan is our CEO and founder. All right. Who's got something important they need to talk about?
Give everybody a chance to jump in. I've got something I'm struggling with. I think it has to do with the permanency well, I guess the permanency of tokens. And I've got a situation where I've got a form, and the form is bringing up a database of jobs. And the created by is one of the users on the website. So there's a user record. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at this job and reject it or accept it and send a notice to the person via email that it's been done. So when I first bring the form open in the pre-init events, so page load events, right? No, it's pre-init events. I read in the job, and I'm just basically using what the system builds for me for the header, and read the job. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to then go and grab the user information for that user and I know who it is because I know the created by. So I created this, you guys use original when you code it, so that there's all of these original tokens. And so I just kind of did the same thing and created what I call job owner token, and did a SQL call right after reading the job, which is the call you guys made. And I pulled it in, and I have something. So on the screen, the static text, I write out job owner username, job owner first name. That all shows. But when I click the reject button, one of the steps there is to send an email to job owner email, and it says the data source job owner doesn't exist. So I'm at a loss.
Yep, because it doesn't exist anymore.
So
You're looking at scope. Once your init finishes loading, everything that it loaded is now gone. All those tokens, all those memory variables, done. The only thing you have left is what you stored in actual fields. So if there's some information you need to continue to store, you could throw it into a hidden field or something like that and read it back at the time that you do a further action. But at the time the event is done, it basically destroys all that data. Sorry, Dale, I hope I didn't just take your spot.
You've just ruined my day, Ben. No, actually, Ben is spot on the answer. Gave me a chance to try and find something to point at and talk to about, but it's absolutely the correct answer. And I'll just say, beyond that, Don, you're not the only one that is has any confusion about this. We're talking every week when we do the Low Code Cafe. We get together afterwards and talk about it, and what are we going to do in the future. And one of the things on the list is just this topic, because it's a little bit confusing how long these things live. So and some of this information, for example, it's kind of hidden here in the help text that says what you can do and how long it lives. But to Ben's point, the things that you do that are done here in the pre-init retrieve variables. We have read patient in this demo that I've got going on, and it's creating original that can be then retrieved. But as soon as the form is rendered, that no longer exists. When you have a button and you try and do something with original doesn't exist at that point. But very easily, let's say that you were trying to do something when they did the add button, in this list of things that you can do, you could add the same read that you did on init into this section, and using the same, hopefully you still have access to whatever information that you needed, like the patient ID, or excuse me, not in your case, it would have been the created by. But if you don't have access to it, that's a slightly deeper topic, and Ben referred to it as well. You for things that disappeared in the process in the on init, you had it accessible here, and you don't, and maybe it only exists here because it was part of patient. You might need to put a hidden field on the form to hold that, and that gives a spot for that to persist between the time, because it will be submitted when that hidden form will be available to you, hidden field will be available to you when you're doing the button processing. So you might need to hide some information on the form.
And every entity generated form has an example of that. The isEdit field is there. That's a token established during initialization, and then the value of it is placed into that field right there. So that's an example of how you can take the tokens that are established during initialization and save them so that you can use them later.
Got it. All right.
So you do the read in your the same read that you do, and oftentimes, I mean, that's a very common thing. And so when you've got a good read that's all set up here, you might even just export it from your on init so that you've got it, and you can then paste that same thing into your button that your add or edit button that you're using, and you paste it back in here and then configure it for, you might need to adjust it a little bit for where is it getting its contact ID or whatever. But then
Yeah,
it will
seems to
exist
me
for
that
the
you
rest of
don't.
that.
It seems to be most efficient to not redo a lookup that you had just done.
Right. So
You might as well use the hidden fields concept. That makes a lot of sense now.
One thing to keep in mind is that hidden field is if it's data that you don't really want to expose in any way, you might want to do the lookup again, because that hidden field can easily be the value of a hidden field can easily be found if you just inspect the page. You can get that value.
Oh, okay,
So just something to keep in mind.
got it.
So
In this case, it's the one of the administrators want to send an email to one of the users, and so there's nothing really secure about that
Right.
to
Sure.
worry about. But I get your point about just doing it over again if it's a issue of security. Okay, cool.
So
I will try that.
another issue. Again, it really all depends on your case, right? So the one that you're talking about is really pretty simple and straightforward, and I would absolutely go the direction you're talking about, stuffing the information into a hidden field. Another case for the reread would be that if the data might have changed from the time that you built the form until they pushed the button, like it was a counter of something, or maybe the email address had changed. If you by rereading it, you're going to get the current value.
Right.
So if it's a very dynamic and active situation, you might need to reread it just to get the current value. But
Right, that makes sense.
In a simple scenario, yeah.
So the one last thing about this is the scope at the beginning. I got the pre-init, and if I at the point where I define the field, I say that the original value is original colon created by or something, and I put that in. Now in the action for the submission of the button press, I use the name of the token name of the field as that's my value that I'm
the token name of the hidden field. Yes.
Of the hidden field, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Got it. Okay.
Now, if I may, I have a question or a possible future request.
Yes, sir.
And I've kind of mentioned this before, but this would be kind of like a perfect example of needing something like this. And that is, let's say you do a SQL statement, you pull out a bunch of fields, you throw it into one token. So that one token is going to give you the token name colon and then whatever its fields underneath are. So it could be field 1, field 2, field 3. It could be multiple bits of data, but it's all stored within one token name.
Yes.
I would like to see an action where we could take a token and convert that into a JSON string, because we have an action to take a JSON string and turn it into a token, but we don't have the reverse. This would be a good idea in the sense that, like in Don's situation, take that token that he loaded at pre-init and then dump that into a hidden field or somewhere as a JSON. And then when he goes to submit again with another action, take that JSON, reconvert it back to a token so it can be used, and then he still has that information, rather than have to manually store that data in separate hidden fields. So if he had 5 bits of data he wanted to store, he would have to have 5 separate fields to keep them separated. Otherwise, he'd have to do comma delimited list and then figure out a way of extracting that and parsing it. Whereas if we just had the ability to take a token, dump it back to JSON, we could just temporarily save that data and then reload it again.
Right. And I thought we had an action to do that, and I thought I have an example of it here. So I'll try and
Well, if
find
we
it.
do, then I'm not aware. And at that point, I will apologize.
No,
But,
no, no.
to
There's
my
no,
knowledge, I know there's the other one where you could take a JSON string and take that into a token, but I didn't know if we have one to do the reverse.
So this is, you've got an entity list you can convert it into JSON. So if you read it as a, and I said, this was old. It was when we were talking about entities, and now they're lists. But if you read into a list, you can convert that to JSON quite easily.
Yeah, but that works only on lists. If you don't have a list and what you have is a token, that there's no way to do the reverse of what I was saying. Like when you do a SQL statement and dump everything into a single token name, there's no way to reverse that process and take that token and dump it out as raw data so that you can reload it again later. And there's no easy way to convert a token into a list, or vice versa. Like those are two kind of separate objects.
Yep. So I will do some work in this area. I feel like I had, for just this use case, the need to be able to put content into a JSON so that you can store it in a hidden field and then recall it on the next one. I'm pretty sure that I've done that somewhere, so I'll find that and make a note of that. But
Hey Dale, this is Matt.
yes, sir.
If you may not recall, because a lot of water's gone under the bridge, but you helped me with that, where I read a list into JSON, put it in a hidden field, and then recombined in this case, the answer to a question with that JSON, and then put it back out to update a specific
Yeah, because you had a dynamic
entity.
situation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
And that might have been the error. That's probably what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. That might. No.
Well, it's yeah. So I've got a question. Yeah, and we were dealing with a list, right? Because we had the question based on.
Correct.
This was part of the. Had a number of questions that were associated with it, so we were remembering a list. So that we need to be able to turn a token into JSON. You're thinking really it's like a database token. JSON. We could probably.
Yeah, it's basically like one row of data as opposed to multiple rows of data.
Mhm. We'll take that as a challenge, and anybody else that wants to take on the challenge and try it for next week, we'll have it. Okay. What else is going on? Ben, I don't know if you were able to or care to take up my challenge that I threw out on Wednesday.
I forgive me, I will admit I was somewhat distracted during that meeting, and I was like doing other meetings and working on like 3 fires at the same time while I was kind of listening to you. And then all of a sudden towards the end, I heard something like, and Ben, if you want to do something. And I even actually turned over to Riva and I said, Riva, did he just call my name? And she's like, I don't know, I was distracted too.
No, we only ask 2 hours a week. I can't believe that you were not paying full attention to me. No, we were talking about last week, you mentioned what you did with using a GUID to store information between calls and using it and we were hoping to get you to show the actual technique that you used to build it versus us. I mean, yes, what you described made sense, but rather than us stumbling through it, I was hoping that we could see the peek behind the curtain.
Sure.
And if you want me to give you a minute to find that, I could. I have another topic. So
yeah, just give me a minute to pull it up so that
don't
I
mean
can
to put
share.
you on the spot. So one of the things that we were also talking about as a possible topic at some point was good low-code documentation. And it didn't really sound like a very exciting or a topic to spend 45 minutes on how do you document stuff, but there is a case for this to try to make your low code as readable as possible for the next guy that comes behind you. So I was wondering what any of you do for documentation internally, or you do, you don't, what's best practices? So anyone passionate about this area?
Description field, description field, description field. That's what I use all the time.
So is it for that case, are you trying to keep track of it for you or for the guy that's coming after you in a year?
It's a little bit of both. I've always been a highly detailed documenter. I document a heck of a lot more in my own internal SQL statements. There's a lot of comments in there to document my SQL stuff. But when it comes to the actions, yeah, I basically, unless it's something like closing a pop-up form or something like that, that doesn't really need documentation, every single action that I use, I document within that action what it does. If it's a SQL statement, I'll put in the documentation, what is it that I'm loading? What type of data? What is it returning? Things like that, so that someone who's looking at it can, without having to open every single action, can start seeing that kind of path and what it is that I'm trying to do, because some of those action stacks can get crazy complex that I write. So rather than having to be sitting there opening up multiple ones, and one of the things I noticed too is, like, I personally like to use also the execute actions grouping so that I could put other actions inside it. I start noticing that once I start using those actions and putting a lot in there, the forms become very slow in opening those action stacks. Sometimes you'll click on the action stack and you got to wait several seconds before that action stack will actually open. So I want to avoid having to open things up if I don't need to. So that's where those description lines become a major thing for me, to avoid opening things that I don't really need to open and then say, crap, wrong one. Now I got to wait like 5 seconds for that to open, then close it, then open up the next one.
So is the description that description area that we're providing, is that sufficient for your needs? Do you ever wish for anything more?
I'll never say I never wish for anything more. There are times that description area, I think, isn't enough, isn't maybe technically big enough, or doesn't allow for like multiple lines of text or things like that. There are times that would be helpful, especially when what you're trying to describe may be something that has like a fork or whatnot, where you want to say, this loads this data in this situation, goes this way, in this situation goes this way. Because it's one string, it's kind of limited as to how much you could fit in there that's going to actually be seen on the screen. Would it be nice if maybe there was a second description, like more like detailed description that can allow for multiple lines. And then maybe when you hover over something, it pops up as a tooltip. That would be nice.
Yeah, because, and that's all, I think you've hit on both the topic and the limitations, right? You don't want to take up a bunch of screen space for something that you use infrequently, but how do you document, and you know, if it's more involved, or I mean, okay, yeah. So that is the issue. So let's see. Matt says, use the error message to add documentation in addition to the field description, which let's see.
Yeah, I've used the error message as well as just a regular message or even a toast, but I set the condition so that it doesn't do it. So in essence, I've got the text of my note, but it doesn't show unless I'm in edit mode.
Yep.
You know, I like that when I want to save notes about what the entire stack is doing. Hey, you know, the purpose of this is, you know, on and on, which is very different than line by line, what this line is doing.
But then let me ask you this, or let me ask Patrick and Dale and the others, you know, from PA Direct. When you do something like that and you add another action that you're actually basically preventing it from running, I mean, technically, aren't you basically also kind of incurring CPU cycles in the sense that that conditional statement has to be evaluated? So potentially, if you use that a lot in a particular action stack or form or whatever, there could be a lot of these conditions that have to be evaluated into, you know, false to say don't run it, just so that you could document.
Yeah, I think there is a case to be made that it's a I mean, every action has to be considered and every condition has to be evaluated. It's it would be very fast, but if you're doing a big loop of things, that it needs to be processed, absolutely. And then, you know, another thing is that for example, if you had a place to put information and you put a bunch of information in there, then it's moving those bytes around to you know, to get them, they're being handled at that level as well, right? So if you heavily, like putting in a few words to document what you're doing versus putting in pages and pages of a PDF to, or you know, a Word document or something to you know, go on and on about it, you're still, that there's a cost that would be associated with that too. You know?
Yeah, but so that answer to your question, though, Dale, is it would seem that we need a place to put some notes. The line by line, like Ben is doing, is pretty awesome, and we should all be doing all of that. But an additional, some kind of like larger scoped note space would be great. We're kind of doing it ourselves.
Yep.
Yeah,
So, go ahead, Jim, sorry.
I was going to say what the way we got around that was for each of the developments we had a OneNote, and in there was all the records of all the meetings, but also there was that wider rationale and explanation of the approach that was taken, and a pseudocode type of description of how the application worked. Especially when you've got pages that link to each other, and forms that link to other forms. When you've got the documentation tied to a particular action or a particular place, like Mark says, you miss that overall context. And I don't know, I've never been much of a fan of very detailed documentation, because I always find that it gets out of date very quickly. But having that wider explanation of the approach, the rationale, the logic behind it, gives you a starting point that then you can look at exactly what's happening if something's broken. So I think having a way to document things at the solution level as well as the action level would be useful.
Did you?
Also, the other thing that's really missing is versioning, because very often it'll be, I know it used to work and then we changed something and it doesn't work anymore, but we'd like to get back to the way it was before, but we've got what it was.
So Jim, did you hyperlink to your OneNote?
No, it wasn't as sophisticated as that. It was just that anyone who was working on a particular project would be making notes in the OneNote and building the application. So they would often get out of sync, and especially when deadlines come or problems come, something would get fixed, and it wouldn't be, the documentation would get out of date. But yeah, as I say, it tended to be more at that higher, more abstract level.
Can I share my screen and just show something really quick on like what it is I do? Just to give an example. Share. All right, again, I have 4 screens. I got to figure out which is the one I'm sharing. This one. Okay, so this is a submit button with an action stack. And as you can see, I use on every single line what this item is doing. So, you know, I always tend to have a default value create update, because lots of times, you know, what I notice is when you're using a token for the very first time, if it has no value, what's going to return is, instead of it returning a blank, it returns the name of the token, which could be problematic. So lots of times what I do is I'll even, you know, do stuff like this where I just literally put a blank into it just so that the token exists. But that being said, you know, I usually always have one, I call it default values, list, basically letting me know, okay, I'm loading up my definition list. If type is from a list selection, and then I use ... to kind of let me know this is because this is a kind of, you know, if it happens, it's going to run. So this is a potential that it, you know, won't be running. If regular user and edit mode and lock text, you know, so some of these can potentially get really long. I try my best to kind of sum up as best as possible. But what I would love is, like, in a situation like this where I have like a long thing, to maybe say, have 2 fields where one is like description brief and the other one's description long, whatever it is. But the long one could be a text box where you put in multiple lines of data. And then if that exists, maybe, you know, somewhere here, either after the action name or before, have like a little icon with an eye or, you know, an exclamation point in it, where if you hover over it, anything that was in that text box will pop up as a tooltip to give you that detailed information regarding that item. So, you know, it could say this, but then I say, wait a minute, I want to know a little bit more about this. Instead of forcing me to open it to then read it, I could just kind of hover and get that information. And then just to show you, like, this is what I mean by my documentation as well. Like, here's the way I do my coding in SQL. I always do blocks ahead. And I always basically say what's going on in each section. And I do this for 2 reasons. One, for myself, because I'll write these things and then sometimes I won't come back to it months or years later. And the other thing is, if there's anyone else that's going to come to this, you know, I've been basically told that I document to the extent where it becomes almost idiot proof for another programmer to come in, because they know exactly what it is that I was thinking, what the section is supposed to do. And there's very little time wasted in having to read the code to figure out what's happening. And it kind of lets people drill into where they need to focus to get something modified, changed, enhanced, whatever. So hopefully that helps explain at least what I do.
Absolutely.
So Dale, as an idea, if there were a action in the action stack that said something along the lines of make note, read note, or something along those lines where it would only be evaluated at design time. That might be useful. That'd be a way to do it.
Yeah, the way that we store things, the way that I'm pretty sure that that's all JSON in the database. So when that action comes back, it's still going to be transported around, whether or not you can keep it from being evaluated, or and you probably can, or at least. But I mean, there's going to be some minimal overhead, I think, to be carried along with it. But I think it'd be an interesting challenge to give to the developers. They sure come up with something I would think quite efficient.
So we've been, all right, Jim, I'm going to go first this time.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about the action stacks, and certainly that's important. One of the areas that I think is probably most in need of help is when you're doing workflows. You're doing so much, or you can be doing so many things in there, and you really are limited to how you can describe it. And it becomes rather opaque rather quickly. All right, Jim, it's all yours.
Yeah, it's a non sequitur now. Yeah, one thing I was going to say is that if we're going to have notes around, it would be really nice to be able to search them. So that, or even to extract them as a readable sequence, so you don't have, while you could look at them in context, you could also say, well, I know there's something in there which said about X. I will be able to search it, and yeah, being able to attach notes to things other than actions, I think it would be very useful, because yeah, sometimes there are decisions made on forms which aren't actions, which deserve documentation as well.
So back when I was playing around with extending the product, I built a documentation action, which is whatever it's keyed off of is. I mean, it still triggers a little bit of logic. I wouldn't say this is. It doesn't get around the part where the condition is still evaluated and a little bit of CPU time is taken up. But because this whole system is configuration file driven, it's easy enough to create a documentation action that doesn't do anything, and then I just used a field type that is. It supports HTML, so you could put some content in here and save it, and it becomes importable, exportable, just like everything else. So even I can create a documentation action. It's possible, but it's not part of the product. I just kind of wondering what you guys did and what you want or need from us. Cool, good discussion. Ben, did you happen to bring up what we were talking about?
Yes, sir.
If you wouldn't mind, I think inquiring minds want to know.
Okay, so all right, so what I had done, I mean, the easiest way to explain it, and I shared this with Matthew earlier, who played around with it a little bit, but this is the return URL that I was using. So this is what I was saying, where I can encode data, a long string of data or whatever it is I need, and reduce it down to a GUID or GUID, however people pronounce it. And then that GUID I could just use to recall that data at a later time. So it basically obfuscates that data. It's stored in the table. You don't have to worry about it being excessively long because it's always going to be that, what is it, 32 character string. And it just basically, there's a couple of items here. So there's like in this case for me, I have my create return URL, my get return URL, which is the reverse. And then I have the supporting SQL statements to it. So for example, this create return URL, what it's actually going to do is it's going to actually run that SQL statement, but it's going to build it dynamically for it to be used elsewhere. And then basically when it comes to the table structure, it's pretty simple. It's just going to be basically these fields here. So you've got your GUID, in this case, the return URL, the entire string length, and then the typical, deleted, created on, by who, last modified, so forth, so on. And this is all it is, your GUID number and a return URL. So as you could see, some of these can get quite long with the data that's encrypted in it. And you can see some of them will have other GUID return URL IDs within it. So it can become nested. So one of them is going to return this, which then if you run it again based off of this, it's going to return a different one, and it can go up a tree in that respect. So it's kind of a nested way of having data as well in there. But this is a very simplistic usage of it because it's just a string. It's not like I'm putting in JSON strings with multiple data points and all that other stuff. This is just a URL, but it basically works on that use case of taking a bunch of data and just bringing it down to a single string level. So for example, right there, I just ran this, and with the default data it puts in there, this string is now going to equate to this return value, this return URL. I have extra code in there to say, like, if there are certain parameters in the URL that I want to skip, I can put those parameter names in there, those query string names, and they will not get compiled in. So if there's, for whatever reason, I say, I know that there's going to be something in that query string and I don't want that in what it's going to store, I can have it remove that. And also anchor links are not by default, when you're looking at the query string, they're kind of invisible because it's browser level. So it's not really seen. So if I know I happen to be on a tab that would force an anchor on it, I can manually add the anchor name in there, and then that would add it to that piece as well. But again, all of these, for the most part, they're all optional. So for example, this is all that's really needed. And truthfully, actually, that's not even needed, because if it's not supplied, it takes the current URL.
Yep.
So, I've written it in a way that you literally just use the token by itself, and it's basically going to take whatever's up here, and it's going to store that and then return back that ID.
Right. So then you can just, you're basically using it right in the middle of your redirect to page, redirect to.
Exactly. So I don't have to actually have any action stacks ahead of it compiling this for me. I literally write, for example, the redirect to URL, and under the URL item, I'll put in whatever URL I'm going to, and then I'll say return URL ID equals, and then I'll use this, which will spit this out as its value. So when I go to the other page, the return URL ID is going to have this value. And when I hit go back, that basically has this guy in here, this get return, and you supply this value, which will spit back the original URL that it came from, its parent.
Yep.
And then I could return to that. So again, same idea, a go back button would just basically have a return, a redirect to URL with this one token in it. and then spitting in there the query string of the return URL ID. This in and of itself returns the complete URL string that I need to go back to.
Yep.
Hopefully that answered the question.
Absolutely. You said that you mentioned last week that you had a variant that used JSON. So for that.
No, I said that, well, no, what I said was that this can be expanded to use that type of methodology. Right now, this is the only kind of real way that I've been using it right now. I can see in the future that I'm probably going to be expanding that to do something a little bit more in depth like that, specifically for grids, because my code is getting more and more and more complex. So there are times where I don't necessarily want to be dumping URL information, into the URL for the grids to be reading.
Yep.
So what I'm thinking of doing is being able to, again, similar to this, where it's just these simplified tokens where I can dump a JSON string, turn it into a GUID, recall that JSON string, and pull out specific values out of it. I just haven't done that yet, but it's not that much of a stretch from what I've already built.
Yep. Cool. Well, again, thanks for the peek behind the curtain.
No problem.
That is really slick, Ben.
I try.
Yeah, I've actually, Ben was kind enough to share that with me, and I have begun, I put it in one of my instances, although I have not yet, I can't say I've got it implemented because haven't had time really, and also wanted to hear further explanation.
All right, we're at the open topic part of our discussion. And actually, there was, I mean, I could bring up topics, but let's see what all you have. Anything else?
I have a question, and I think I know the answer, but I want to ask anyway. Are there good examples anywhere in the Plant and App / action that go through building a Razor script, or to build out essentially HTML and some kind of if-then looping logic? Does anybody know? Ben, you're laughing.
I'm chuckling only because I had that same issue when I was first learning Razor script. It took me a while to kind of figure out the right syntax to get that to work. But I finally did it, and I've tried my best to kind of keep that in my head, so that in the future, whenever I need to do something like that, I can recreate it. There is actually, I mean, if it helps any, I might be able to actually show you one, which I think is what you're looking for. Just gotta pull it up.
While you're looking, I seem to recall, in fact, I think I am pretty sure I actually did it. There was an example of a Razor script running as a token where you could go out, and I think it was looking at the admin logs and building, reading the admin logs and then building out an HTML table based on the admin logs, if I'm not mistaken. That was a long time ago. A long time ago and many brain cells ago.
Yeah, finding documentation on Razor is actually quite, I think it's one of the things that's difficult, because a lot of what's written is written for MVC or some other framework. So finding just enough Razor to do what you need is quite tricky. So yeah, like Ben, I've got a collection of old Razor scripts which I go back to and look at and say, oh yeah, that's how you did it, because it's not always obvious.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I always
Well,
have to remember, like, where did I use that situation? So I always know that's where I'm going to go back to and use that as my initial template to then extend.
Yeah.
And again, the other thing with the Razor script is there's two different ways of doing it. You can either use C# or you can use VB. Now, me personally, I come from a VB world. I know a lot of people are more C# oriented, so I'm always looking for ways to those whatever samples I find that are in C#, I convert them to VB. But
Mhm.
then that's like a whole nother situation because not everything cleanly converts over. So then it's like, well, how do I tweak this so that it works correctly? And I do have a sample if you want to take a quick look at it.
Sure.
If it helps anyone looking. But
Is VB dead now, or is it just
no.
it's frozen in time, isn't it? It's not, the
No, it's
language
not.
is
No,
not
it is
being
not. No, it
extended.
is not. No, it is not. No, it is not. It is not dead. It is not frozen. It is very much alive.
I know, but
And
it's not.
continues to
The
evolve.
language isn't changing, because C# is, I think it was 7 or 8 now. So C# is constantly on the move and becoming more and more bloated and expansive.
Every single time .NET. Now, what people have to realize is C# and VB now are front end languages basically to .NET. Every time .NET gets updated, those languages get updated. If there are new features, there are new things, both languages are being updated. So they very much both are alive. It's just which way do you feel more comfortable in accessing that .NET framework? Are you more comfortable in the VB native language, or are you more comfortable in the C native language? But both of them are very much alive, and every time .NET gets updated, Visual Studio gets updated, they work on both. So VB is not by any way, shape, or form lost or frozen or being relegated to history books. It's still there. It's just not everyone is for it. You know, it just depends what you're more comfortable with.
Yeah, Microsoft seems to be less enthusiastic about it, perhaps.
With that being said, so this is basically the gist of it. In this case, so you want to do a for loop where it's going to, for argument's sake, be building an HTML-based return. In this case, this is a comma delimited CSV file that I'm creating, but it's the same exact principle. So what you're going to basically do is you're going to say a for each loop. You've got your object reference here. So this is basically the object that is going to be the individual record.
Yeah.
And then this is the call to another token, which is a SQL statement that's returning multiple data rows. That's the only way you're really going to be able to get this to run in a loop type situation. So they're going to have to be two tokens. One of them is going to be what's going to actually develop your export data. The other one is the one that's going to be supplying the source material in a table format with multiple rows. So you're just basically looping through that. And then, you know, in this case with VB, it's your @ symbol, the variable with its individual piece underneath it of the specific item, the field that you want, and then any additional stuff. So in this case, I'm exporting out a delimiter. Now, the reason I do it this way is because, again, VB is a little, when you're doing the VB scripting, it's a little weird. The @ symbol, if you just do it directly and try to do it with a, let's say if I put a comma as the delimiter, and a period, a comma, that's going to cause a problem with the way Razor script works. It won't accept that. So that's why I ended up having to do this. So the delimiter is right here. I'm just basically saying output this very next item afterwards. And this just basically pulls, you know, dumps out all the information. And then again, I have a new line here as well. That's that control the 13 and 10 ASCII characters. So that's the new line. But when it comes to HTML, it's the same idea. You would just basically start for example, up here, let's say you wanted a table with multiple rows, you're going to export out a string, you know, whatever it be,
Right.
something to
Yep.
that effect. Whoops.
Yeah, it's trying to help you.
Yeah. And then at the end of the loop, you're going to close out that table. And then you're going to do your TD rows and TRs in here. And then that would export out your entire HTML.
Now, what about getting the, are there any tricks associated with reading tokens? Here's my goal. So I've got a list, an action that pulls a list from SQL, which I then essentially create JSON elements from. And those elements contain the variables that I need to display in the HTML, along with, of course, the HTML and a bunch of other stuff, but mostly HTML. So are there any tricks associated with getting that down to that token value level? And that would be inside that, for each loop. I seem to recall some, weirdness with regard to quotes and double quotes and so on and so forth. Or am I mistaken there?
Well, I mean, forgive me. I was trying to follow the what you were saying there, but I'll admit I was a little lost there.
That's
but
funny
I mean,
because I'm
like,
leading you down the wrong path.
But yeah,
I mean,
what's
in the loop,
what's the data source?
anything that you put as, for example, something like this. So this is a token that you're passing into this token. That is going to be evaluated one time at the time that this is originally run. So it's only ever going to be able to hold one particular value. If you're looking for something that's going to be changing values, at that point, it really depends on the language you're using, whether it be C# or VB, but you would basically be, for example, setting up something like that. You can dump into this variable whatever you want, and then use that within that loop as well. So that's something that can be changing as you're coming in. Now, if it's something that you're reading data, like in this case, like you're looping and you want it to come from a different source, typically the way I would do something like that is, well, it depends. If it's data that's part of the rows, you just access the data as you see here, whatever the field name is per row. Now, if it's something that's supposed to be like an overall definition, so you want to return back or use a list of what are the field names that are within each row, I would typically have a second token, and I would execute that, in here, and then dump that into whatever I needed, whether it be an array, a comma delimited string, whatever, and then I would use that as I needed within this. But it would basically have to be two different SQL calls, so to speak, because one of them is going to be the definition, whereas the other one is going to be the data.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much. In this context, what I'm doing is creating a list from SQL, then creating a JSON object. Then from there, parsing the tokens. I have to do that twice to get down to the individual level that I need. And then what I would need this code to do was essentially change the record inside that JSON, change the record that I'm looking at, starting with 0 up through the end. So I'd need to know, obviously, well, I think I need to know how many are there, so I can know when to end my count. And then the loop through would just simply be building the HTML based on the different values that are in the JSON token.
So you're actually iterating through the JSON token, is that right?
Right. So in this case, it's a list of, call it companies. And so the first record is company : 0 dot company name, for example. And then it's 0 dot company address and so on. And then it goes from there to the next record, which would be company, 1 dot company name, so on and so forth, if that makes sense.
My answer, I think, if I'm understanding, the answer is yes, it is possible. And I believe I did something that might actually be similar, and I'm trying to remember where I put it. But basically, if I remember correctly, what I used was Newton JSON in the Razor script. So you would basically, if I'm understanding correctly, you would have a token, you would be passing it the value of the entire JSON string, or within or within the token itself, if you have a call to another token that basically is going to be returning the whole JSON script, and then you're modifying that JSON script, to replace data or whatnot. You would then be using that Newtonsoft JSON package in your scripting to basically parse out that JSON string and be able to manipulate it and then recompile it. I see Jim Everett nodding his head, so I'm assuming he's done something very similar.
Yeah, you're getting into the realms of sort of real programming here, almost. There's no easy way around it, and trying to the Newtonsoft library is very good for that sort of thing. Gives you a way in. There may be the only way to know if there's an easier way of doing it is to understand the data, but you'll make it that Razor script is going to be doing a lot of hard work.
Right. Well, so I put in the chat an example of the element that's going in, one of the elements that's going into the HTML, and that's the company name, the organization. So what would need to change is that the 0 value get incremented each loop through.
Yeah.
And you're saying Newtonsoft, potentially.
That's if the way you'd load that in with your using statement or the code when you're constructing your Razor script, and that will give you additional methods that you can call. But the way you iterate through it's possible to update that once you've gone through that JSON and you've changed the bits that you want to change. What happens then? You're just rendering it out.
Right. So right now, I've not really attempted this yet in using Razor script, but right now what I'm doing is I've manually built essentially an HTML display page using these variables, and in this case I'm using bootstrap cards to display the data and make a pretty looking page. So that's essentially the end goal for me, and I've got a bunch of instances, not only with this particular client, but also with other clients, where just being able to, write the HTML once, stick a bunch of variables in there, throw it into a Razor script loop, and have it produce a page that renders intelligently would be of, significant value.
That sounds familiar for things that we've done before. I haven't done it in a token, but done that sort of thing before. So it's certainly possible to do, but it's without seeing more of it, it would be difficult to say exactly how you do it. But I'm trying to think the way we've done it before. One of the ways we've done it before is use the code section of the Razor script to produce is to go through and create a final list of all the values. So you do your manipulation in a series of nested loops or whatever you need, and iterating and building up a new variable or a new array, and then the bit in the rendering section of the Razor script just runs through that one array. So you've got all your values, and it just spits out the sections. As you say, you load in the HTML template with placeholders, and you just you load it in, replace, and concatenate.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you guys know, I found the code if you want me to
please.
share it and show you.
Sure.
I knew it was somewhere.
The pressure of live.
Mm. When
I'm
you have
surprised you don't document where you put things back.
Yeah, I know. You know what? I have so many different sites that it's trying to remember when I needed to use it and for what reason, and that will kind of narrow it down which site I have to look at and then move on from there. But here, well, let me come out of this. So basically, the first thing you got to do is in that additional assemblies, you have to say that within your bin folder, you want to use the Newton Soft JSON DLL. Once you do that, now you'll have access to it. And it's just basically you're going to dimension out the object. You're going to say that you want to use Newton Soft JSON link JObject. This is the parsing command for it. So this is actually my entire JSON string. So as you can see, that's right here. So this token is getting me my JSON string. And then I'm feeding it to the parser, which is now going to create this object. Now this object is down here, and it's a simple loop. Now you're going to be looping based off of this other object, which is an internal version, the J token. And then that, and again, the way you use it is that object is the object, and then whatever the collection is, the collection name. And then inside, you're going to have this item, and each item has the field name attached to it. So here you can modify, you can either read it by doing the toString, or if you want, you can assign a value into this object if you wanted to change it. So, this is basically how you would end up manipulating and going through and parsing out and, doing whatever you need to do to that JSON object. But as you can see, this is a very long script and it builds an HTML table, which is what it spits out after I finish doing this. This is basically taking a data file. It's with the JSON, what it's doing is it's taking a file format definition along with all of the rules for the file. Then it's taking the data of a file that's supposed to be in that format and then validating that the data in that file matches and follows all the rules. They're the right, type of data, that it's a string or it's an integer, or there's the right number of columns, that the dates are in the right format, whatever it be. And then it spits out at the very end the results of, did it find any rows that had errors in it that didn't follow the rules for that file format. So it gets very complex, as you can see, but it works. So it is possible.
Is it advisable?
Yeah, listen, they're really, there are, as you can see right here, there are uses for it. And that's why we have access to it. But, like Jim Everett said, once you get to this level, you're talking programming. You're walking outside now of the low code box. You've literally hopped out of that box now, and you're going into the coding world. So you really need to, strap yourself in, because you're going to be going down that rabbit hole if this is what you want to do. But unfortunately, this is really the only way, by using, Razor and Newton Soft. That's really the only way that you're going to be able to get that minute control over those JSON strings that you want in a relatively easier fashion. And I say relatively because this doesn't look easy. But this is a lot easier than you trying to parse out the JSON on your own and figuring out where you're going to be, manipulating data and then rewriting that JSON string again. At least you're not reinventing the wheel. You just have to kind of understand the waterfall logic here, whereas you have one object that's a collection and then you have another object that's a row. So, one object is, if you want to look at it from SQL perspective, one object is a table, one object is a data row. And then within that data row, you have each field, so once you get that logic in your head of how these objects interact with each other, it becomes easier to understand. But there's coding involved.
And 4.
All right, with that, I'll say we've gone past our hour, so I am gonna call it here and say thank you for making a very illuminating low-code campfire, and we will see you next week in this same hour. Thank you all, and hang around for Afterglow if you have a minute.
Thank you.